The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Riverside Public Library, casting long shadows across the quiet reading area. Saracen adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and smoothed down her cardigan as she wheeled another cart of returned books toward the fiction section. At 34, she had been working as the head librarian for almost 3 years, and she genuinely loved her job. There was something peaceful about the orderly world of books, the quiet conversations, and helping people find exactly what they were looking for. "Another thrilling day in paradise," joked Marcus, one of the younger librarians, as he passed by with his own cart. Sarah smiled politely but didn't respond. She had learned early on that her colleagues saw her as the quiet, bookish type who probably went home to feed cats and read romance novels. They weren't entirely wrong about the reading part, though her taste ran more toward military history and tactical manuals than romance. The library served a diverse community, including many military families from the nearby naval base. Sarah often helped veterans research benefits, students working on military history projects, and active duty personnel looking for ways to continue their education. She understood their needs in a way that surprised her colleagues, though she never explained why. Around mid-morning, a group of teenagers came in, clearly on some kind of school assignment. They approached the reference desk where Sarah was helping an elderly man find genealogy resources. The teens waited impatiently, whispering among themselves and occasionally snickering. When the man finally left with his materials, the apparent leader of the group, a boy about 16 with an attitude that preceded him, stepped forward. "We need help finding stuff about Navy SEALs," he announced loudly enough that several patrons looked up from their reading. "It's for our history project on Special Forces." "Of course," Sarah replied calmly, pulling out a notepad. "Are you looking for historical information, recent operations that have been declassified, training procedures, or personal accounts?" The boy blinked, clearly not expecting such a detailed response. Just general stuff, I guess." "Like what they do and how tough they are?" Sarah nodded and began writing down call numbers and book titles. "I'd recommend starting with The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday by Richard Marcinko, then moving on to Lone Survivor by Marcus Luttrell. For historical context, you'll want Navy SEALs, A Complete History by Kevin Dockery. There are also several documentary DVDs in our multimedia section." One of the other teens, a girl with bright purple hair, rolled her eyes. How would she know anything about SEALs? She probably learned it all from books. The comment stung more than Sarah cared to admit, but she maintained her professional composure. "I'll write down the locations for you. The books are in the 359.9 section, and the DVDs are behind the main desk." As she handed over the list, the first boy looked at her skeptically. "Have you actually read all these?" "Most of them, yes," Sarah replied simply. The teens exchanged glances and barely suppressed laughter. "Right," the purple-haired girl said. "I'm sure you're a real expert on special forces." After they left, still snickering, Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She had dealt with condescending attitudes before, but something about their dismissive laughter reminded her of darker times, times when proving herself had meant life or death rather than just professional respect. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Sarah helped a mother find picture books for her toddler, assisted a college student with research on local history, and processed a stack of interlibrary loan requests. During her lunch break, she sat in the small staff room eating a sandwich and reading a thriller novel, trying to push the morning's encounter out of her mind. When she returned from lunch, her colleague Janet was at the front desk looking flustered. "Sarah, thank goodness you're back. There's been some kind of mix-up with the community room reservation. The Veterans Support Group thought they had it booked for this afternoon, but the schedule shows it's reserved for the Riverside Historical Society." Sarah frowned and pulled up the reservation system on her computer. Both groups had legitimate confirmations for the same time slot. "I'll call both groups and see if we can work something out. Maybe the Historical Society can move to the meeting room upstairs." As she was making phone calls, trying to resolve the scheduling conflict, a woman in her 50s approached the desk. She wore a crisp business suit and carried herself with military bearing that Sarah recognized immediately. "Excuse me, I'm Commander Patricia Hawkins from the Naval Base. I'm here about the Veterans Group meeting.
I understand there might be a scheduling issue? Sarah looked up from her phone. Yes, ma'am. I'm working to resolve it now.
The Historical Society is being very understanding about moving to our upstairs room. Commander Hawkins studied Sarah's face with sharp, intelligent eyes.
You seem very efficient. Have we met before? You look familiar.
I don't think so, Sarah replied, though something about the commander's bearing triggered memories she usually kept locked away.
I'm Sarah Chen, the head librarian here.
Well, Miss Chen, I appreciate your help with this. The Veterans Group meeting is quite important. We're discussing resources for transitioning service members, and several people have driven quite a distance to attend.
Of course. Military families are an important part of our community. I'll make sure everything is set up properly for your group.
The commander nodded approvingly.
You understand the military community. That's not always the case with civilian staff. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang.
It was the Historical Society president, confirming they could move their meeting upstairs. As she hung up, she noticed Commander Hawkins was still studying her with curious eyes.
Problem solved, Sarah announced.
The community room is all yours at 2 o'clock. I'll make sure the chairs are arranged in a circle as requested, and there's a coffee station set up.
Excellent work, Commander Hawkins said.
As she turned to leave, she paused.
Miss Chen, have you ever considered that your organizational skills might be valuable to our transitioning veterans program?
We're always looking for civilian coordinators who understand military culture.
Sarah felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name.
I'm very happy in my position here, but thank you for thinking of me. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about the commander's offer. She watched through the glass doors as veterans began arriving for their meeting. Some walked with confidence, others seemed more hesitant, and a few bore visible signs of their service in the form of prosthetics or mobility aids. She recognized the look in many of their eyes, the careful way they assessed their surroundings, the unconscious positioning near exits. Around 4 o'clock, as the veterans' meeting was wrapping up, Sarah was shelving returns in the military history section when she overheard a conversation from the next aisle. I don't know, sir, a young voice was saying. Civilian jobs just seem so soft. Like, what am I supposed to do, sit behind a desk all day pushing papers? Son, came the reply in Commander Hawkins' authoritative voice, some of the toughest people I've ever known work civilian jobs.
Don't mistake quiet competence for weakness. That librarian who helped us today? She handled our crisis with more efficiency than half the junior officers I've worked with.
But she's just a librarian, the young voice protested.
What could she possibly know about real pressure? Sarah's hand tightened on the book she was holding.
She had heard variations of this conversation countless times over the years, from people who assumed that choosing a quiet life meant she had never experienced anything else. Real pressure isn't always about life and death situations, Commander Hawkins continued. Sometimes it's about maintaining standards and excellence in everyday circumstances, about serving your community with dedication even when no one notices. As the voices moved away, Sarah remained hidden among the shelves, struggling with emotions she thought she had put to rest years ago. She had chosen this life deliberately, seeking peace and anonymity after years of intensity that most people couldn't imagine. But moments like this made her question whether she was hiding from her past or simply choosing a different way to serve. The library grew quiet as closing time approached. Sarah was doing her final rounds, checking that all computers were shut down and straightening chairs, when she found a folder left behind in the community room. It was thick with papers and bore Commander Hawkins' name on the cover. As she picked it up, several pages slipped out and scattered across the floor. While gathering them up, she couldn't help but notice they were personnel files for transitioning veterans, complete with service records and specialties. One file caught her attention, belonging to a young woman who had served as a communications specialist in Afghanistan. The notation in the margins read, "Struggling with civilian transition. Excellent technical skills but lacks confidence in non-military environment." Sarah stared at the page, seeing her own story reflected in those clinical notes. She remembered the overwhelming sense of displacement she had felt during her own transition, the feeling that nothing in the civilian world could match the intensity and purpose of her previous life. The library had been her sanctuary, a place where she could use her skills to help others while maintaining the low profile she desperately needed. As she gathered the scattered papers, she noticed another file that made her pause. The veteran was a former explosive ordnance disposal specialist who had lost his right hand in an IED blast. His file noted exceptional attention to detail and problem-solving abilities, but expressed concern about finding suitable civilian employment. Sarah knew that with proper support and understanding, someone with his skills could excel in dozens of different fields. She secured all the papers back in the folder and locked it in her desk drawer to return the next day. As she performed her final security check and set the alarm system, Sarah found herself thinking about paths not taken and lives not lived. She had been so focused on blending in that she had perhaps forgotten the value of standing out when it could help others. The drive home to her small apartment took her past the naval base. Through the chain-link fence, she could see the obstacle course where young recruits trained, their shouts carrying across the evening air. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember the feeling of absolute certainty that had come with her old life, the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. That night, as she sat in her reading chair with a cup of tea and a book, Sarah couldn't concentrate on the pages in front of her. Instead, she found herself thinking about the young veterans she had seen that afternoon, about their struggles to find purpose and place in a world that often didn't understand what they had to offer. She thought about Commander Hawkins' words about quiet competence, and about the teenagers who had dismissed her knowledge so casually. She set down her book and walked to her bedroom closet. Behind her work clothes and casual wear, pushed far to the back, was a small wooden box she hadn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were things she had thought she would never need again: commendations, photographs, and a single military patch that bore a symbol most people would never recognize. Sarah picked up the patch and traced its edges with her finger, remembering the day she had earned the right to wear it. She remembered the pride, the brotherhood, the absolute clarity of purpose that had defined those years. She also remembered why she had walked away from it all, why she had chosen books over battles and quiet service over recognition. But, as she sat there in the dim light of her bedroom, holding a piece of her past, Sarah began to wonder if perhaps there was a way to honor both versions of herself. Maybe the quiet librarian and the person she used to be didn't have to remain forever separate. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them meet. The next morning brought an unexpected crisis to the Riverside Public Library. Sarah arrived to find 2 police cars in the parking lot and Commander Hawkins pacing near the main entrance. As she approached, she could see that one of the library's large front windows had been shattered, leaving glass scattered across the sidewalk. "Miss Chen," Commander Hawkins called out as she spotted Sarah approaching. "I came by early to retrieve some files I left yesterday and found this. The police are reviewing security footage now." Officer Martinez, a veteran himself whom Sarah recognized from previous community events, looked up from his notepad. "Looks like someone threw a brick through the window around 3 a.m. No signs of forced entry or theft, so it might be random vandalism." Sarah surveyed the damage, her mind automatically shifting into assessment mode. The broken window was concerning, but what caught her attention was the placement of the damage and the fact that nothing else had been disturbed. "Officer Martinez, was anything written on the brick or thrown with it? Any kind of message?" "Actually, yes," he replied, pulling out an evidence bag. There was this note wrapped around it. Through the clear plastic, Sarah could see a piece of paper with crude writing that read, "Military lovers go home." Commander Hawkins' expression darkened. "This is targeting yesterday's veterans meeting. Someone doesn't appreciate our group using community facilities." As they stood discussing the incident, Janet arrived for her morning shift and immediately began fussing about the broken window and the impact on the day's operations. "We'll have to close the front entrance until the glass company can get here," she said anxiously. "And what if this happens again? Maybe we should reconsider hosting military groups." Sarah felt a familiar surge of protective anger, though her voice remained calm. "We absolutely will not be changing our policy about serving veterans. They're members of this community and have every right to use public facilities.
But, Sarah, Janet protested, what if there's more trouble? What if someone gets hurt? Before Sarah could respond, Commander Hawkins stepped forward. Miss Chen is right. You don't negotiate with bullies or give in to intimidation. That's how problems get worse, not better.
Officer Martinez nodded in agreement.
We'll increase patrols in this area, especially around meeting times. Don't let whoever did this think they've won.
As the morning progressed and the immediate crisis was managed, Sarah found herself working alongside Commander Hawkins to ensure the veterans' meeting could still take place that evening. The commander's folder from the previous day remained locked in Sarah's desk, giving her additional opportunities to interact with the officer. You know, Commander Hawkins said as they rearranged furniture in the community room, yesterday I mentioned that you seemed familiar.
I keep having the feeling we've met before.
Sarah felt a flutter of unease but kept her voice steady.
I have one of those faces, I suppose. People often think they know me from somewhere.
Whom? The commander studied her again with those sharp, analytical eyes. You handle crisis situations very well for a civilian.
Most people would be more shaken up by something like this morning's vandalism.
I suppose working in public service teaches you to stay calm under pressure, Sarah replied, focusing intently on adjusting a chair rather than meeting the commander's gaze. During the lunch hour, Sarah walked to the local hardware store to get quotes on window replacement and security upgrades. The owner, Mr. Peterson, was a Vietnam veteran who had been supportive of the library's programs for military families.
Damn shame about your window, he said, shaking his head. Some people have no respect. You need anything special for security, you let me know.
Veterans take care of their own around here. As Sarah walked back to the library, she noticed a small group of people gathered across the street, watching the building. They seemed to disperse when they saw her looking, but something about their behavior set off warning bells in her mind. Years of training had taught her to trust those instincts. Back at the library, the afternoon brought the return of the teenagers from the previous day. They approached the reference desk where Sarah was helping a patron find tax preparation guides. Hey, the purple-haired girl said, we heard about your broken window. Bet you're pretty scared, huh? The way she said it, with a slight smirk, made Sarah look at her more carefully.
Not particularly. These things happen in public buildings sometimes.
Yeah, but this was targeted, the boy added.
Someone doesn't like military people hanging around here. Maybe they have a point. Sarah's professional mask slipped slightly. I'm sorry, what exactly are you suggesting?
Just that maybe some groups cause more trouble than they're worth, the girl replied with false innocence.
Like, why should regular people have to deal with problems because you let soldiers use the place?
Something cold settled in Sarah's chest. Those soldiers are veterans who served our country and are now contributing members of this community. They have every right to use public facilities.
Whatever, the boy said dismissively.
Just seems like you're bringing problems on yourself by catering to military people.
Normal people don't act like that.
After they left, Sarah sat at her desk trying to process the conversation. There had been something calculated about their comments, as if they were testing her reaction or trying to gauge whether the intimidation was working. She made a mental note to mention their behavior to Officer Martinez.
The early evening brought a larger crowd than usual for the veterans' meeting.
Word of the vandalism had spread, and several community members had come to show support. Sarah watched through the glass doors as veterans and civilians alike filed into the community room, their faces set with determination.
Commander Hawkins approached the circulation desk where Sarah was processing returns. I wanted to thank you again for your support today. Not everyone would have stood so firmly behind our group after what happened.
It was the right thing to do, Sarah replied simply.
Yes, it was.
But not everyone chooses to do the right thing when it costs them something. The commander paused, studying Sarah's face again. You know, I've been in the military for over 20 years.
I've learned to read people pretty well. There's something about you that doesn't quite fit the typical librarian profile. Sarah's hands stilled on the books she was scanning. I'm not sure what you mean. Your situational awareness, for one thing. The way you immediately asked about messages with the vandalism. How you assessed the damage pattern.
The calm way you handled the crisis.
Commander Hawkins leaned against the desk.
Most civilians would have been much more rattled.
I read a lot of crime fiction, Sarah offered weakly. Aha. The commander's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. What branch? Sarah looked up sharply. Excuse me?
What branch did you serve in?
Army? Navy? Marines? For a long moment, Sarah considered her options.
She could continue to deflect, or she could trust this woman who had clearly seen through her carefully constructed cover.
Navy, she said quietly. Commander Hawkins nodded as if confirming something she already knew. I thought so. How long? 8 years. What did you do? Sarah hesitated, then made a decision that surprised her. Special operations.
The commander's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professionally neutral.
That explains a lot. Why didn't you mention it yesterday when we were discussing resources for transitioning veterans?
Because I transitioned a long time ago, and I prefer to keep my service private.
Fair enough. But you might consider that your experience could be valuable to the people in that room tonight. A lot of them are struggling with the same transition you've clearly navigated successfully.
Before Sarah could respond, the sound of raised voices came from the community room. Through the glass doors, they could see that the meeting had been interrupted by several people who appeared to be arguing with the veterans. Sarah and Commander Hawkins moved quickly toward the disturbance. As they reached the community room, they could hear a man's voice raised in anger. You people need to take your war stories and your problems somewhere else. This is a family library, not a military base. The speaker was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, flanked by several others including, Sarah noted with grim satisfaction, the teenagers who had been making snide comments at the reference desk. Sir, Commander Hawkins said firmly, this is a public meeting in a public building.
These veterans have every right to be here. Do they? Oh, the man shot back. Do they have the right to bring violence and destruction to our community? Someone threw a brick through this building's window last night because of your meetings.
An older veteran in a wheelchair spoke up calmly.
We didn't throw any bricks, sir. We're here talking about job placement and educational opportunities.
The violence follows you people, the man insisted.
Maybe if you didn't gather here, we wouldn't have these problems. Sarah felt something snap inside her.
The months of condescending comments, the dismissive attitudes, the casual assumption that choosing a quiet life meant she had never been tested, all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity.
You're right, she said, her voice cutting through the argument with military precision. Violence does follow some of us. But not in the way you think.
The room fell silent as Sarah stepped forward, her entire bearing shifting.
The quiet librarian disappeared, replaced by someone whose presence commanded immediate attention. Violence follows us because we've seen what happens when good people don't stand up to bullies. We've seen what cowards do when they think no one will fight back.
Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority.
And we've learned that the only way to stop a bully is to make it clear that their intimidation won't work.
The man in the suit faltered slightly but tried to maintain his aggressive stance.
You don't know anything about this community or what's best for it. Sarah smiled, and there was nothing librarian-like about it. I know more than you think.
I know that someone threw that brick to frighten these veterans into leaving. I know that you and your little group have been testing the waters to see if your intimidation is working. And I know that you picked the wrong librarian to mess with. Commander Hawkins was staring at Sarah with dawning recognition, but she remained silent, letting the scene play out.
Who do you think you are? The man demanded. Sarah's smile widened slightly. Someone who spent 8 years making sure people like you couldn't intimidate people like them.
She gestured toward the veterans, many of whom were now watching with intense interest.
The purple-haired teenager spoke up nervously. She's just a librarian. She doesn't know anything about fighting. Is that what you think? Sarah asked, her tone conversational. That librarians can't have other skills? That quiet people are weak people? She turned to address the room, including both the intimidators and the veterans. I chose this job because I love helping people find what they're looking for. I chose a quiet life because I earned the right to peace. But I never chose to be weak, and I never chose to let bullies run roughshod over people who deserve better. The man in the suit was clearly losing ground but made one last attempt. You can't threaten us. We have rights too. Absolutely you do, Sarah agreed. You have the right to leave this building immediately and never disrupt a legally scheduled meeting again. You have the right to find other ways to spend your time that don't involve harassing veterans. And you have the right to remember that some of us chose quiet lives not because we couldn't handle loud ones, but because we already did. The confrontation deflated as quickly as it had escalated. Faced with Sarah's unwavering confidence and the now alert attention of a room full of veterans, the disrupting group began to back down. The man in the suit muttered something about complaints to the city council, but he was already moving toward the exit. As the troublemakers filed out, the purple-haired girl paused near Sarah. You're not really just a librarian, are you? Sarah's expression softened slightly. I really am a librarian. But that's not all I am, just like these veterans aren't just their service records. People are complicated. After the group left, the veterans' meeting resumed, though the energy in the room had shifted significantly. Sarah could feel eyes on her as she returned to the circulation desk, but she focused on her closing duties, trying to process what had just happened. Commander Hawkins approached as Sarah was shutting down the computers. That was interesting. I lost my temper, Sarah said simply. It won't happen again. I hope it will, if the situation calls for it. The commander paused. Sarah Chan. I've been trying to remember where I knew you from. It finally came to me during your little speech in there. Sarah's stomach clenched. Commander, I really prefer to keep my past separate from my current life. I understand that. But I think you should know that what you did in there tonight? That's going to make a difference for those veterans. They needed to see that civilians would stand up for them, that their service mattered to someone outside their own community. As they walked out together, Commander Hawkins continued, I'm not going to push you to get involved beyond what you're comfortable with. But I want you to know that if you ever decide you want to use your experience to help other veterans transition, I'd be very interested in talking with you. Sarah locked the library doors behind them, acutely aware that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, her two worlds had collided, and, instead of disaster, something unexpected had emerged. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she knew that the comfortable anonymity she had maintained for so long was no longer possible. As she drove home that night, Sarah found herself thinking about the faces of the veterans in that room, about their obvious relief when someone had stood up for them. She thought about the intimidators and their assumption that quiet meant weak. Most of all, she thought about the moment when she had allowed her real self to emerge, and how right it had felt despite all her careful reasons for keeping it hidden. The small wooden box in her closet was calling to her again, but this time not with nostalgia or regret. This time, it was calling with possibility. The weeks following the confrontation at the veterans' meeting brought unexpected changes to Sarah's routine at the Riverside Public Library. Word had spread through the military community about the librarian who had stood up to the group trying to intimidate veterans, and she found herself receiving quiet nods of appreciation from service members and their families who used the library. More significantly, Commander Hawkins had begun stopping by regularly, always with legitimate library business but clearly hoping for opportunities to continue their conversation about Sarah's background. She was persistent but respectful, never pushing too hard but making it clear that her offer to involve Sarah in veteran transition programs remained open. You know, Commander Hawkins said one Tuesday morning as Sarah helped her research continuing education programs for transitioning personnel, we're organizing a job fair specifically for veterans next month. We could really use someone with your unique perspective to help coordinate with civilian employers. Sarah kept her eyes on the computer screen as she pulled up relevant websites. I think my perspective might be more helpful from the background. Sometimes it's better to support without drawing attention. Is that what you've been doing? Supporting from the background?
The question hung in the air as Sarah printed out the information Commander Hawkins had requested. I support our community in the way that works best for everyone involved.
But what if there's a way to do more good by stepping forward occasionally? Before Sarah could answer, a commotion near the front entrance caught their attention.
Through the glass doors, they could see Officer Martinez talking animatedly on his radio while standing next to a young man in military fatigues who appeared highly agitated. Sarah moved quickly toward the entrance, Commander Hawkins following close behind.
As they approached, they could hear Officer Martinez trying to calm the young man.
Listen, Danny, you need to slow down and tell me exactly what happened.
Start from the beginning. The young man, who couldn't have been more than 22, was clearly in distress.
His hands shook as he gestured, and his voice cracked with emotion.
I can't find anywhere to go, man.
They kicked me out of my apartment because I had another episode, and the VA says there's a waiting list for housing assistance.
I've been sleeping in my car for 3 days.
Sarah stepped outside, her professional instincts taking over.
Excuse me, I'm Sarah Chen, the head librarian. Is there something we can help you with? Officer Martinez looked relieved to see a familiar face. This is Danny Rodriguez.
He's a veteran having some housing issues. I was trying to figure out what resources might be available.
Danny looked at Sarah skeptically.
No offense, lady, but unless you've got a spare room or know someone who wants to rent to a guy with PTSD episodes, I don't think there's much you can do. Something in his tone and the defensive set of his shoulders reminded Sarah powerfully of her own early days after leaving the service. The anger masking fear, the pride fighting against the need for help, the overwhelming sense of being lost in a world that operated by different rules.
What's your MOS? She asked quietly. Danny's head snapped up in surprise. Combat engineer. Why? Explosive ordnance disposal? Some of that, yeah. How do you know about MOS classifications? Commander Hawkins stepped forward. Danny, this is Sarah Chen. She's someone you can trust.
Something in the commander's tone seemed to register with Danny, and his defensive posture relaxed slightly.
Sarah made a quick decision. Danny, have you eaten today? I'm not looking for charity. I'm not offering charity.
I'm asking if you've eaten, because if you haven't, it's hard to think clearly about solutions.
There's a good diner 2 blocks down. Why don't we go talk about some options?
An hour later, they sat in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, Danny working his way through a substantial breakfast while Sarah and Commander Hawkins discussed potential resources. Officer Martinez had been called away but promised to check back later. The thing is, Danny was explaining between bites, I was doing okay until my neighbor complained about me having a nightmare episode. Apparently I was shouting in my sleep again, woke up half the building.
The landlord said he couldn't risk other tenants moving out. Sarah nodded understanding. How long have you been back stateside? 6 months.
I thought I was adjusting pretty well, but the dreams. He shrugged helplessly.
They come and go.
Sometimes I'm fine for weeks, then something triggers them and I'm right back in Kandahar, hearing incoming mortars.
Are you connected with any veteran support groups? Commander Hawkins asked.
I went to a couple meetings, but honestly, it felt like sitting around complaining. I don't need to talk about my feelings, I need practical solutions.
Sarah understood that perspective completely. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything that uses my skills.
I'm good with explosives, obviously, but also general construction, electrical work, mechanical repair.
Problem is, most employers hear veteran with PTSD and, suddenly, the position is filled. That's illegal discrimination, Commander Hawkins pointed out.
Yeah, but proving it is another story, and I need income now, not after a lawsuit. Sarah pulled out her phone and began scrolling through contacts.
Danny, are you willing to consider temporary housing with a military family while we work on finding you something permanent? I'm not looking for handouts. Not handouts.
There are several families connected to the base who host transitioning veterans in exchange for help with maintenance, security, things like that. It's a mutual benefit arrangement.
Commander Hawkins looked impressed. How do you know about these arrangements? Sarah continued scrolling through her phone rather than answer directly. I know people. She found the number she was looking for. Let me make a call.
20 minutes later, Sarah had connected Danny with the Kowalski family, whose son was deployed overseas and who had been looking for someone reliable to help with yard work and minor home repairs in exchange for room and board. Mrs. Kowalski had specifically requested a veteran, understanding the challenges of transition.
Just like that? Danny asked in disbelief as Sarah hung up from confirming the arrangement. Just like that. Mrs. Kowalski will meet us at the house in an hour to show you the space. If it works out, you can move in today. Commander Hawkins was studying Sarah with renewed interest.
You have quite a network of contacts for someone who prefers to work in the background. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. You build connections over time when you work with the community.
As they prepared to leave the diner, Danny grabbed Sarah's arm gently. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me.
Sarah looked at him for a long moment, seeing echoes of her own struggles in his eyes.
Because someone helped me once, when I needed it most.
Because you served your country and deserve better than sleeping in your car. And because helping people find what they need is what I do.
The trip to the Kowalski house went smoothly.
Mrs. Kowalski, a warm woman in her 50s whose husband was a retired Air Force sergeant, immediately put Danny at ease. The guest quarters were comfortable and private, and the arrangement for maintenance work in exchange for housing was clearly defined and mutually beneficial. This is perfect, Danny said as they toured the small apartment above the garage.
Mrs. Kowalski, I promise you won't regret this.
I'm sure I won't, dear.
My husband always says that veterans take care of their own.
As they drove back toward the library, Commander Hawkins was unusually quiet. Finally, as they pulled into the parking lot, she spoke.
Sarah, what you did today was remarkable.
You had connections ready, you understood exactly what Danny needed, and you made it happen quickly and efficiently.
I was glad I could help. This isn't the first time you've done something like this, is it?
Sarah turned off the engine and sat in the quiet car for a moment.
No, it's not. How many veterans have you helped transition? I don't keep count. Ballpark. Sarah sighed. Over the past 3 years?
Maybe 40 or 50 individuals and families. Commander Hawkins stared at her.
50 veterans, and you've been doing this quietly, without any official program or recognition? Official programs have paperwork and oversight and bureaucracy that slows things down.
People like Danny need help now, not after a committee meets to discuss their case.
But, how do you fund this? How do you maintain all these connections?
Sarah realized she had revealed more than she intended.
I get by.
I know people, I make some calls, I solve problems.
It's not complicated. It's extraordinary.
And it's exactly what we've been trying to figure out how to do through official channels. Commander Hawkins paused.
Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. What was your rate in the Navy?
The question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah could continue deflecting, or she could trust this woman who had already seen through most of her careful cover.
So, she said quietly. Special Operations. Which unit? Sarah hesitated, then decided that partial honesty was no longer sufficient. SEAL Team 5.
Commander Hawkins went very still. You were a Navy SEAL.
For 8 years. But SEALs are all men. Sarah smiled grimly.
Officially, yes. There are programs that don't officially exist, for people who officially were never there.
The silence stretched between them as Commander Hawkins processed this information.
When she finally spoke, her voice held a note of awe.
How many people know? Very few. My transition paperwork was handled at a level that most people never see.
As far as official records are concerned, I was a communications specialist.
But, you were actually
I was actually someone who did things that can't be discussed, in places that don't officially exist, with people whose names are classified at levels you probably don't have clearance for. Commander Hawkins stared out the windshield for a long moment.
And, now you're a librarian. Now I'm a librarian who occasionally helps veterans find their way in the civilian world. Occasionally? Sarah, if you've helped 50 people transition successfully, that's not occasional. That's a full-scale operation. Sarah felt a familiar wariness creep into her chest. Commander, I need to be clear about something. I chose this life because I needed peace and anonymity.
I help other veterans because I understand their struggle, but I do it quietly and informally for good reasons.
What reasons? Because there are people who would be very unhappy to learn that I'm alive and living a normal life.
Because my transition required certain agreements about maintaining a low profile. And because the moment this becomes official or public, it becomes complicated in ways that put people at risk.
Commander Hawkins nodded slowly. I understand.
But, Sarah, what you're doing is too valuable to remain completely hidden. There has to be a way to expand your impact without compromising your security.
Maybe. But that's not a decision I'm ready to make.
As they sat in the parking lot, both women lost in thought, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold.
The message was from an unknown number. Enjoying your quiet little life, Phoenix?
Some birds shouldn't nest too long in one place.
Sarah's hands went still on the phone, years of training keeping her expression neutral despite the ice forming in her veins.
Phoenix had been her call sign, known only to a very small group of people, most of whom were supposed to be dead.
Sarah?
Commander Hawkins noticed her change in demeanor immediately.
What is it?
Nothing important, Sarah lied smoothly, deleting the message.
Just a spam text.
But, as they walked back into the library, Sarah's mind was racing through implications and possibilities, trying to calculate how someone from her past had found her, and what they wanted. The comfortable life she had built over 3 years suddenly felt as fragile as the glass window that had been shattered the week before. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine library activities, but Sarah's attention was divided between helping patrons and analyzing the threat that had just materialized. By closing time, she had developed the beginning of a plan, though it was one she desperately hoped she wouldn't need to use. As Commander Hawkins prepared to leave, she turned back one last time.
Sarah, if you ever need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. I appreciate that. I mean it. What you shared with me today, it stays between us unless you decide otherwise. But, if you need backup, I'm here.
After everyone left and Sarah had completed her closing routine, she sat alone in the quiet library, staring at her phone and waiting to see if there would be another message. The silence stretched around her, broken only by the settling sounds of the old building.
Finally, she made a decision.
She walked to her office, unlocked her desk drawer, and pulled out Commander Hawkins' folder from the previous week. Inside, she found the business card with the commander's direct number. She dialed the number, and it was answered on the first ring.
Hawkins. Commander, it's Sarah Chan.
I think I need to talk to you about expanding my impact after all.
But, not for the reasons you think.
Commander Hawkins arrived at the library within 30 minutes of Sarah's call, using her security clearance to bypass the after-hours locks. Sarah met her at the staff entrance, noting that the commander had changed from her dress uniform into civilian clothes and appeared to have brought backup in the form of a subtle security detail positioned around the building's perimeter. "Talk to me," Commander Hawkins said without preamble as they settled in Sarah's office.
Sarah handed over her phone, showing the threatening message. Someone from my past has found me.
That call sign hasn't been used in over 3 years.
Commander Hawkins studied the message carefully. Phoenix. That was your operational designation? In certain circles, yes. Who would have access to that information? Sarah leaned back in her chair, weighing how much to reveal.
The short list would be my former team members, certain intelligence handlers, and people we operated against who had good intelligence networks.
And the long list?
Anyone with access to classified databases who knows what to look for foreign intelligence services with deep penetration capabilities, or private contractors with connections to the Black Ops community. Commander Hawkins set the phone down carefully.
Sarah, I need to understand what we're dealing with here. What kind of operations were you involved in?
For the first time since she had started working at the library, Sarah allowed herself to fully inhabit the person she used to be. Her posture straightened, her voice took on the crisp precision of a briefing, and her eyes held the alert calculation of someone accustomed to life and death decisions.
My team specialized in deep penetration operations in hostile territory.
Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, intelligence gathering, and elimination of high-value targets. We worked in places where the U.S. officially had no presence and dealt with problems that officially didn't exist.
How deep? Deep enough that our existence was compartmentalized at levels where even the president might not have been briefed on specific operations.
We were ghosts, Commander. We went places no one else could go and did things no one else could do. Commander Hawkins absorbed this information with professional calm.
What ended your service?
Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out the darkened window of her office.
My last mission went bad. Really bad.
The kind of bad where you're the only one who comes home, and even that required help from people who officially don't exist.
Your entire team? 6 good people who trusted me to bring them home.
Sarah's voice remained steady, but Commander Hawkins could see the weight of that loss in her eyes. The mission was compromised from the beginning. Someone fed us intelligence that was designed to get us killed.
Inside job?
That was the conclusion of the investigation. But the people responsible had connections that went all the way to the top of the intelligence community. Prosecuting them would have exposed operations and methods that were too valuable to burn.
Commander Hawkins leaned forward. So they offered you a deal.
They offered me a new life and a promise that the people responsible would be quietly removed from positions where they could cause more damage. In exchange, I agreed to disappear completely. No contact with former colleagues, no use of my real name or history, no involvement in anything that might draw attention to my continued existence.
But you've been helping veterans.
Carefully, quietly, and in ways that couldn't be traced back to my operational background.
Until now.
Commander Hawkins stood and began pacing, her own tactical mind working through the implications. Someone sending you that message means either the deal is off, or someone new has discovered your location. Or, Sarah added grimly, the people who were supposed to be neutralized weren't, and they've been looking for me.
What's your assessment of the threat level? Sarah's smile was sharp and entirely without humor. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead. The message is either a warning or an invitation to negotiate. And if it's a warning?
Then, they want me to run, which means there's something about my current situation that they find threatening. Commander Hawkins stopped pacing and looked directly at Sarah.
Like your growing profile in the veteran community. Possibly.
Or they need something from me and want to establish that they have leverage. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from the same unknown number, Murphy's Diner, booth in the back corner, tomorrow at noon.
Come alone, or we'll have to discuss your library friend's safety.
Both women stared at the phone in silence for a moment.
That's a problem, Commander Hawkins said finally. No, Sarah replied, that's an opportunity.
They're local, they've been watching me, and they want a face-to-face meeting. That tells me several things.
Such as?
They're not here to kill me immediately, they know my patterns well enough to reference the diner where I took Danny, and they're confident enough to suggest a public meeting. That means either they have significant backup, or they believe they have enough leverage to control the situation.
Commander Hawkins pulled out her own phone. I'm calling this in.
We can have tactical teams positioned around the diner, surveillance on all approaches, and electronic countermeasures in place.
No. Sarah's voice carried absolute authority.
Commander, with all due respect, this is not a military problem to be solved with military solutions. Sarah, you're talking about walking into what could be a trap with no backup. I'm talking about using skills I spent 8 years developing to assess a threat and deal with it appropriately. If we surround the diner with tactical teams, one of three things happens: they abort and disappear, they escalate to violence, or they shift the meeting to somewhere less controlled. None of those outcomes help us. Commander Hawkins looked frustrated but seemed to recognize the logic. Then, what do you suggest? I go to the meeting as requested, but not defenseless. I assess their capabilities and intentions, and I gather intelligence on who they are and what they want.
And if it goes wrong?
Sarah stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She removed a key from her pocket and unlocked the bottom drawer, pulling out a small device that looked like a modified cell phone.
This is a tactical communicator with GPS tracking and an emergency beacon.
It's connected to a network that, let's say, it's not entirely civilian.
If I activate the emergency signal, people will come, and they won't be asking questions about jurisdiction or diplomatic immunity.
Commander Hawkins stared at the device.
You've had contingency plans all along.
I've had contingency plans since the day I arrived in this town.
The difference is that now I might have to use them. They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of Sarah's plan.
Commander Hawkins would maintain her normal schedule but would be positioned to coordinate with local law enforcement if needed. Sarah would wear a wire and carry the tactical communicator, but she would go to the meeting alone as requested.
There's one more thing, Sarah said as they prepared to leave.
If this goes bad, if I don't make it back or if I have to disappear again, I need you to take over helping the veterans I've been working with.
Sarah.
I have files on everyone I've helped, contact information for resources, and notes on ongoing cases.
Danny Rodriguez is just the beginning.
There's Maria Santos, who's trying to get her husband into a PTSD treatment program.
There's James Thompson, who needs help translating his military logistics experience into civilian supply chain management.
There's... Sarah paused, overwhelmed by the thought of abandoning people who were counting on her. I'll take care of them, Commander Hawkins said firmly.
But, you're coming back.
I hope so. But, if I don't, you need to know that everything I've told you about my background is true, but it's not complete. There are people and resources connected to my past that can help veterans in ways that official channels can't. If you need to access those resources, you tell them Phoenix sent you, and you give them this.
Sarah removed a small pendant from around her neck.
It looked like a simple piece of jewelry, but Commander Hawkins could see that it was actually quite sophisticated, with what appeared to be electronic components embedded in the metal.
What is it? Authentication. Proof that I'm really gone and that you're acting on my behalf.
Commander Hawkins took the pendant reluctantly. I hope I never have to use this.
So do I.
The next morning, Sarah followed her normal routine with one significant exception. She dressed not as a librarian, but as someone prepared for any contingency. Under her conservative cardigan, she wore body armor disguised as a compression garment. Her shoes were comfortable but designed for rapid movement. Her purse contained items that most librarians would never need, and her manner carried a subtle alertness that her colleagues noticed but couldn't quite identify. You seem different today, Janet commented as they discussed the day's programming schedule.
Just focused, Sarah replied.
Sometimes we have to deal with situations that require our full attention. At 11:30, Sarah left the library with a casual announcement that she was going to lunch and might be a bit late returning. She walked to Murphy's Diner along her usual route, but her trained eyes catalogued every vehicle, every face, every potential threat or escape route. The diner was moderately busy with the lunch crowd, which provided both cover and complications. Sarah spotted her contact immediately, a man in his 40s sitting alone in the back corner booth, dressed in casual business attire but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. As she approached the table, he gestured for her to sit across from him.
Phoenix. You look good. Civilian life agrees with you. I go by Sarah now. And, you are? Someone who knew you before you became a librarian.
His accent was American but carried hints of time spent overseas.
You can call me Mitchell. I assume that's not your real name. Does it matter?
We're here to discuss business, not to reminisce about old times.
Sarah studied his face, searching her memory for recognition.
There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place where they might have crossed paths.
What do you want, Mitchell? I want to offer you a job. Sarah blinked in surprise. Of all the scenarios she had prepared for, a job offer hadn't been among them. I'm sorry? The people I represent have been watching your little operation here.
Helping veterans transition, solving problems that official channels can't or won't address, maintaining a network of contacts and resources that spans both civilian and military communities.
It's impressive work. And it's exactly the kind of skill set we need for a project we're developing.
A private organization dedicated to helping veterans who fall through the cracks of official support systems.
Sarah's instincts were screaming warnings. What kind of organization?
The kind that has resources and authority that government programs don't.
The kind that can cut through bureaucracy and solve problems quickly and efficiently.
The kind that pays very well for very specialized services.
And if I'm not interested?
Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then, you continue your quiet life as a small-town librarian, and we continue our work without you.
Though I should mention that our research suggests your current activities might already be attracting unwanted attention from certain government agencies.
The threat was subtle but clear.
Sarah kept her voice steady. What makes you think I'd be interested in working with people who communicate through veiled threats?
Because we know what happened to your team, and we know who was really responsible.
Sarah went very still. Explain. The intelligence that got your people killed? It came from someone in our organization.
Someone who was working a separate agenda and decided your team was a liability.
And
that person had an unfortunate accident about 6 months ago. But, before he died, he provided us with some very interesting information about other operations that were compromised, other teams that were betrayed, and other people who might be interested in setting the record straight. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle she had been carrying for years suddenly shifting into new configurations. You're telling me that my team's death was part of a larger pattern. I'm telling you that there are people still alive who are responsible for a lot of good operators dying for bad reasons. And I'm telling you that we're in a position to do something about it.
In exchange for what?
Your help with our veteran transition project.
Your network, your contacts, your expertise.
1 year of your time, after which you can return to your library with our blessing and our protection. Sarah stared across the table at this man who claimed to have answers she had been seeking for years. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, but the possibility of justice for her fallen teammates was a temptation she hadn't expected to face.
I need time to think about it.
Of course.
But don't take too long.
Other people are also interested in your particular combination of skills and connections.
We'd prefer to work with you voluntarily.
Mitchell stood and placed a business card on the table. When you're ready to hear more details, call that number.
But, Sarah?
Don't try to investigate us through official channels. We operate in spaces that official channels don't acknowledge. After he left, Sarah sat in the diner for another 20 minutes, processing the conversation and its implications. The business card contained only a phone number, no company name or address. But, tucked under it was a small flash drive. When she returned to the library, Sarah found Commander Hawkins waiting in her office with barely concealed anxiety.
How did it go?
Better and worse than I expected, Sarah replied, filling the commander in on the conversation while keeping her voice low.
So they want to recruit you, not eliminate you. That's how it appears. But, there's something else. Sarah produced the flash drive. He left this.
They moved to Sarah's computer and inserted the drive. It contained a single encrypted file that required a password. Sarah stared at the prompt, then typed in her old call sign. The file opened to reveal personnel records, operational reports, and classified communications spanning several years. As they scrolled through the documents, a pattern emerged that made Sarah's blood run cold. My God, Commander Hawkins breathed.
They're right. Your team wasn't the only one.
The files documented at least 6 separate operations over 3 years where elite military teams had been fed compromised intelligence, resulting in casualties and mission failures. In each case, the teams involved had been investigating or threatening interests connected to a network of private contractors and intelligence operatives.
"This is huge," Commander Hawkins said. "This is evidence of systematic betrayal at the highest levels." "This is also bait," Sarah replied grimly. "They're showing me just enough to make me want more."
"But, if it's true, then accepting their offer means I might finally be able to get justice for my team. But it also means abandoning the life I built here and stepping back into a world I left for very good reasons." As they sat in the quiet library, surrounded by books and the peaceful routine of civilian life, Sarah found herself facing the most difficult decision she had made since the day she chose to leave the military.
On one side lay safety, anonymity, and the satisfaction of helping veterans transition one at a time.
On the other lay the possibility of justice, the chance to prevent more betrayals, and the return to a life of danger and moral ambiguity.
"What are you going to do?" Commander Hawkins asked.
Sarah looked out the window at the town she had come to love, thinking about the veterans she had helped and the ones still struggling to find their way. She thought about her fallen teammates and the promise she had made to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. She thought about the mysterious organization offering her answers and the price they wanted in return. "I'm going to call them," she said finally. "But not to accept their offer."
"Then, why?" Sarah's smile was sharp and entirely reminiscent of the operator she used to be. "Because I think it's time Phoenix came out of retirement."
"But I'm going to do it on my terms, not theirs." Commander Hawkins stared at her.
"Sarah, what are you planning?"
"I'm planning to use every skill I learned in 8 years of special operations, every contact I've made in 3 years of veteran advocacy, and every resource available to both identities to find out who really killed my team and make sure they can't hurt anyone else."
"And the mysterious organization?"
"They want to use me. I'm going to let them think they can, while I use them right back." As the afternoon sun slanted through the library windows, Sarachin began planning an operation that would merge her 2 worlds in ways she had never imagined possible. The quiet librarian and the deadly operator were about to become one person again, and this time, she wasn't planning to hide.